We got married in October and found out we were pregnant in January. I mean, it was not part of the plan. Something flipped, like a switch flipped. I'm standing there in this cubicle, and this guy, he'd been referred to me by someone we both know and trusted. And he says, I lost 70% of my business. And I said, do you want to see if we can help? He said, I don't think so. And I looked at that sonogram and I thought, okay, I know what this guy said is dumb, but I have to push through this because there's somebody who is going to depend on me. And it was sort of this watershed moment of, for me, you just have to fight through some things. And it's not even a fight. It's just, you don't pick the first thing they say at face value.
That's Adam Boyd. Adam is a former high school English teacher, football coach for kids, and he was going to go into law, bombed the LSAT, and ended up kind of stumbling into cold calling some CEOs, and very quickly became a top 50 performer globally in the Sandler Training Network. And he co-authored a best-selling book as a VP of sales. He led a company to get acquired, and then a year ago actually bought his own training company. And he's hands down the best simplifier that I know. And I don't say that lightly, and that's very difficult to do, is simplifying very complex things. And he does it better than anyone I know. And that story that you just heard about the sonogram, that's kind of like the whole episode. How a guy who never planned to go into sales has built everything that he has by keeping things very simple, pushing through the really hard moments, and fighting for the people that depend on him. So this is a really good one. Let's dive in.
All right, what's going on, Adam? Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, great to be with you, Ray. I wish I were in Mexico, but I'm not. So we'll just do it from this direction.
Love to have a margarita with you. We'll do it in person next time, man. I believe, if my research is correct here, I believe March is the year anniversary of acquiring Trinity Training and Development. Is that right? Was that a year?
Yeah, it was a lot, but yeah, we got it done. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for remembering that.
So 1 year ago, the day that it closed, how did you feel?
You have those experiences in life and you're like, this is going to be the pinnacle. And you think that's everything. And everyone says it's not, other than maybe winning the Super Bowl. It was one of these things that was like, okay, great. And now I have all this work to do. But I will tell you, one of the biggest things it did for me, it settled this thing where I was always looking for what's next. And when I got into like the training and consulting space, I never thought this will be what I do. I'll go find the next thing. Well, I got the next thing. It happens to be in this space. And so it sort of quieted that, where it told me, these are not the things to worry. I don't even need to consider these opportunities. I don't need to think about that. I don't need to worry about that because I'm so busy working on the thing right in front of me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. How long did you shop for? You were looking for a company to buy for a while, right?
I started meeting with a good friend of mine from business school probably in 2011 to think that we started talking about it. And what happened was we were on these different life tracks where he had kids, and then I was ready because I didn't have kids yet. He had kids, and then it switched and I was ready and he wasn't. I eventually kind of parked it for a while, started growing my own family. And then I got to a point where I was pretty serious about it, but I couldn't put the pieces together, and that's a whole conversation in itself. So 2016, I'm really looking, and then I go work for a private equity backed company, which you know all about. And then I started looking again in 2019, 2020. A deal fell apart and something happened in 2020 that kind of changed things for folks. And then I was like, all right, what am I going to do? So I figured that out. And then I really started looking again in 2022, 2023. And we finally closed on the deal early of 2025. And there are all these great books out there and all these influencers who are like, just buy a company. It's so easy. Here's how you do it. I'm like, took a long time. And I may not be the smartest guy, but it took us a while. We looked at a lot of things.
And what's the last year been like? So when you bought it, because you had a company. I mean, you had your own business. Are you merging them? What's the last year been like operationally?
The last year was, I get into things probably like you, and I see all this opportunity and I think, great, let's go do it. But then I have to think through, who's actually going to do all that work? So we have the training business, like what's historically been Northwood, and we're going to merge into Trinity. That's our sales training business. So I was having to rethink how we delivered services to get me out of doing everything every day. I had a couple of failed attempts at figuring that out, and then had to start bringing some people on on that side to do some delivery and rework it. And then inside of Trinity, had to rework some things. There wasn't a CRM. There wasn't some of the tracking we needed. We had to get our hands around what was happening on the digital side. I needed to bring somebody on to offload work. I hired a young guy who's really got a huge upside. And I said, hey, I'm going to hire you for 3 jobs. You're probably going to suck at one, be okay at another, and we're going to find the thing you're good at, but we need help in all 3 areas. Get him on board, putting in financial controls. It's been nonstop. And you've probably been there where your days start at 7 a.m. and they end at 7 p.m. and it's calls and meetings all day. A lot of that, nights where I'm laying in bed at 2 a.m. thinking, is this a bad idea? Should I have done this? Other days where you're thinking, this is the greatest thing ever, and I'm so glad I did this. Absolutely roller coaster. Operationally, we're trying to do 20 things at once, and people will say, you got to prioritize. It's like, well, it feels like these are all really, really important, and we really need to do these, and I'm not a great prioritizer, so we attack it.
When you look back at either the transaction or the years since then, if you could do one thing over, magic wand question, is there anything that you would do differently?
It's a great question. And often I'm going so fast that I don't find that 30 minutes to think about that. I probably would have found some way in diligence. It wouldn't have changed the deal. I would have found some way to get under the hood a little bit more on a certain set of items that would enable me to plan the first 3 to 6 months better. That way it would have said, all right, we're going to work on this and this and this, and we're not going to touch anything else. And you could have told me to do those things and I wouldn't have really paid attention or thought about it. On this end, having gone through it, it would cause me to say, I should do that again. And if you think about acquisitions, it's probably why you keep doing them, because you get better at doing them.
That's a good point. Are you still looking to buy, or is that the thing right now? Would you buy another company right now?
No, not right now. When we get to a place where I feel like we've got some controls, I think I was telling you, we've got to get a very operational EA in here to kind of free me up. And there are a few things we could do on the sales training side so I can step out of that. And I don't know people who've really done that very well. I'm kind of figuring that out. If you know somebody I need to talk to who's been good at selling the thing, but not being the delivery model in a world or a skill set like sales, I'd love to meet them. Once we get there and this thing's a little more steady state, I would look to go buy a complementary product that we could build in with the goal that, hey, we're going to cross-sell into their customer base. You probably see this. You start getting complementary companies and you're like, oh, you start seeing all these ways to cross-sell into them. And if you've got the ability to sell and market, it becomes a thing. I've had probably 5 conversations with companies from various sizes, anywhere from 30 million to 500 million in the last 2 weeks. And everybody's big issue is cross-selling. How do we do that?
Yeah, you have good insight into that because of the nature of what you're doing and who your customers are. Then you're going to see what their challenges are. So if you got to do due diligence and you could go in and find the pieces of information that you know now that would have helped you in the first 3 to 6 months, what would that have been?
We were really dependent on Google Ads, and we've been working away from that to develop other channels so that we're not single-threaded, and we've been thinking through that. We were trying to increase similar communication via email. Not crazy. And I'm not talking thousands a week. I'm talking 20 to 50 a week, right? We're trying to ramp that up. And we noticed we were getting stonewalled. Like we were just getting ghosted. People weren't even replying. I don't know if it's ghosted. We just know one was replying. And I didn't know to look for the health of the email domain. And it turns out way back in 2018 or 2019, one of our domains landed on a blacklist. And when we started looking, I brought in some guys who were really sharp and they did some diagnostics and they said 50% of your emails are landing in spam. Now think about that. If you've got an inbound model and half of them are landing in spam and you know how to write an email, you got a problem. I would have probably dug into that. I would have dug even more into the digital funnel to understand it, to work through how do we optimize that and what are some of the things we need to do in the short term. And then I'm never really worried about delivery. That's my problem. You're probably great at it. but I'm always thinking, just go sell more. I think I would have thought through, what can we do from a capacity standpoint so that we know how, all right, at this point, we need to reinvest in delivery. You learn that now because you went through it. And yes, I know no one knew to say, hey, go look and see if you're on any of your domains are on a blacklist.
After this deal is done, there's probably all these lessons that you learn and you go, all right, let me make sure to correct next time. I'm going to make some other mistakes. I'm going to screw the next one up too, but I won't make these mistakes. Have you gone back and like created that list for yourself?
No, I'm going to do it after this call is over. I'll probably say, I need to do these 3 things.
Well, good. Then, all right, podcast over. We're done.
No, I need a partner who is so great at that stuff. Because my belief is just go sell more. But the problem is you need somebody to help you learn a little more intentionally as you go through it. So, but yeah, there are a handful that I would do. And, and part of it is, I think the big question is, how do I get enough? I had a really good relationship with the seller and we still do. I think the other thing I would look at is, how do I get enough trust where they could show me more once we're verbally agreed? And I just say, hey, look, here's the price we're going to pay you. It's not going to change. I need this access to this information. And sometimes sellers don't even know. There's certain things you could ask me for in my business. And I'd be like, I got to go ask somebody. I don't know where that is. I think the big key is, can you get the relationship with the seller to get that kind of information?
Yeah, I bet a lot of that's built on the trust, but then there's the acquisition part of it. But then there's the operator part of you that says, I'm good with the deal. Now I'm thinking about details, not to try to screw with the valuation, but I'm now thinking about, how am I going to integrate this thing? How am I going to run it? What am I going to do? And making that flip, I imagine, is hard for the seller too.
Well, and I think it is, because the seller starts thinking really differently. Like, you've re-signed an LOI, their psychology fundamentally changes. And they're great people. They're now thinking, they're starting to think about getting out of the business, transition, retirement, or whatever they're doing next. And that becomes a real challenge to manage through.
We were talking before this, and I said, it's a fun timing of a conversation, because we've got repeatable revenue ventures, and I'm about to actively publicly, this will be the first time I say it, like looking for a company to buy. Having just done this a year ago, what would be your best piece of advice in terms of finding the right business and making the right deal, going through what you did and all the due diligence, all the searching, everything else? What would be your best advice to somebody, me, going out to buy a company to find the right one?
Well, you already know the space you're looking at, and you know a ton about the business because you're working in this space. I have a ton of respect for you. So anybody listening to this, I am a big fan of Ray. I think the question you've got to get somebody to ask you is, what do you take for granted that's true in these businesses? What do you assume to be true because of how you think that potentially is not true at all? So for me, for example, I would never have thought to think about the health of an email domain. That seems really simple, but that's the kind of thing. And sometimes somebody is as organized and as disciplined, as structured as you. My guess is the blind spot is not realizing other people aren't as organized and as structured and as disciplined as you. Things aren't as tied up as neatly. And you have to start asking, what am I taking for granted because of how I am? That's one thing. And then there was a guy I heard, his name is Mark. Golly, I can see his face. He's really smart. And he had this framework for a business to buy. One of the things he said was he had this criteria, and it had nothing to do with industry. It had nothing to do with price point. It had to do with a series of things like, can I add a new channel of revenue? It wasn't just, can I optimize it or make it a little better, but he had these series of things. He said, if I can find a business with some of these things to be true, where I understand this, this, and this, but I can add a new channel, or I could make it what's called a star business. He said, those are one I want to buy. And when you think about a star business, you probably know this. This is for the listener. But in Boston Consulting Group in the 60s came up with their Boston box. And the Boston box said businesses are one of four things. It's a cow, meaning it throws off cash, but its growth is really limited. It's a star, meaning it's the number one business in a market growing more than 10 to 15% a year. It could be a dog, which means you need to sell it off or shoot it because it's not a cash cow and it's not a star. It's a question mark, but you don't know. But Mark's thought was, I'm looking for a star business. Now, the problem with star businesses, they eat cash. They eat a lot of cash. They grow a lot and they can be really big and they can make you fabulously wealthy. But how do you find it? And so as you go to look for it, I think it's being really, really clear on your criteria and how you leverage your superpowers to do it and not take things for granted in the process. I don't know if that was specific enough, but that's where I would go.
Question some of your beliefs. Like there's things that we take for granted that we assume to be true based on how we operate or how we do things. And if we assume that that's true somewhere else, and then you find out afterwards it's not the case, I think that's really good advice. Kudos to you, man. Like you put in a lot of work on that. I mean, I knew throughout the stage, like we were friends, and I was like, all right, yeah. I knew you were going to land one, but that's awesome. It's been
well. I got to
cool
tell you, it was a walk of faith because you're sitting there going, is this ever going to happen? And I'd actually given up. Probably it's September of 24. I'm just going to make peace that this isn't going to happen, and I'm going to focus on this other business. And a month later, the door opens for this, and I'm like, I'm just really blessed. But one of the things that I think was the key success factor is I felt like I could trust the seller. We might do things differently, but that made it easier, cleaner, and faster. And the more you can find a seller you want to do the deal with, the better.
Did you know them before?
No, but I met him. And after the first 2 conversations, I said, this guy's legit. Because everybody's worried. Why are they selling? There's got to be something they're hiding. And he's like, look, we're getting older. We want to spend time not working. I just could trust this guy. And he'd be honest. He's like, I don't know, or I've never done that, or I haven't bothered with that. And he would tell me what he did know. And it just made the deal so much easier. In fact, at one point, the attorneys are working on things and he and I just kind of pulled off to the side and said, hey, let's work this out, you and me. And that was a massive win that got through an impasse. Here's one thing that helped me. I had a guy help me on my deal. His name's Patrick, and we still do a lot of work with Patrick because I really trust him. He, for me, was a really calm presence that could help step in when I would get emotionally involved in the deal. Because I'm sitting there thinking about making the biggest risk of my life, the biggest bet, and you get attorneys in there and accountants, and everything starts happening. And basically, you and the seller are writing checks to everybody else. Right. And for you guys, everything to align. There's not as much on the line for all these other people. And I had somebody who could kind of step in at times. And when I got emotionally involved or frustrated and possibly could have blown the deal up, he was able to kind of navigate us through that.
So a good advisor, like somebody to help temper some of the emotions as you're going through.
He was part of some of the negotiations just because he could kind of step in with attorneys or CPAs and he could just very calmly handle something where I'm just getting worked up.
I was reading your background and like when I'm doing this, right? And we are, like I said, we've already known each other. So this is cool. And I'm reading about a friend that I already know. And I'm like, hey, this is kind of cool. And I forgot that you were an English teacher and you made the transition from teaching straight into sales. And if I'm correct, you went like straight from high school English teacher to cold calling CEOs, right?
There was a little gap, and I can fill that in, but the gap was not big. I mean, I went from English teacher to doing nonprofit work, which wasn't a lot different in some ways. And then I bartended and was a writer, and then I went to business school and then got into cold calling. But the funny thing was, you come out, you went to business school at SMU, right? And you come out and you're like, I got the MBA. I've learned a lot. I busted my ass. I sat in a windowless room and cold called for $15 an hour, right? I've got this fancy degree. That's what I did. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, English teaching was so much more intellectually stimulating than that.
Do you remember your first week? So you go from English teacher to MBA and your first week of cold calling. What's that like?
This would be fun to compare notes because I know you built a sales org for the chamber, but I remember he kind of spent 30 minutes with me, an hour, kind of saying, hey, here's how we do things. This is the call. I remember he had a book. It was a book of lists and it was like this big and he kind of threw it down. And he's like, all right, just only call on presidents and CEOs. I don't want to talk to anybody else. And he said, here's what you need to do. And I literally just stared at that phone And I looked at that list and I just started calling. I hated it. And so anytime I had anything good happen, I wanted to run down the hall and talk to somebody about it. Not so much to get a attaboy, but just to kind of, can you correct me? Can you steer me? But I thought, what the hell am I doing? I was too dumb to quit though. So I just kept doing it. I'm curious, like you led the team at the chamber. So did you start making calls there or how did that work for you?
I started in cold calling and I got the job because I moved to Dallas and my goal was to get into politics. So I can't remember how old I was, 2022, something like that.
By the way, the photos of you from back then, completely different.
Oh, it's funny. And there's like different versions. There's like Fat Ray and then there's Skinny Ray. And there's like, I went through some phases at the chamber and I started at the chamber. I saw their ad and it was like something like free enterprise, defend American business, this and that. I'm like, this is my crew. Cause I've got a political blog at the time. I'm trying to like make a name for myself. And I said, I'm going to get into politics, but I don't have a law degree. In fact, I don't even have a real degree. And I don't have, family in politics. So I'll go in through sales. And so I said, I'll plug my nose and do this stupid sales thing. But my goal was to be a lobbyist. Like from day one, I said, I'm just going to do this. So I started volunteering. I'm like, by day, I'll do the cold calling. And by night, I'll start volunteering for the lobbyists and stuffing envelopes and doing all this other shit. I was not good at cold calling, but I had I had somebody come to me and say, hey, this is what I do. And Charles was his name. And he just stayed there my whole career. And I don't know what made this guy so generous, but he came over and said, basically, I'm going to save you. And said, this is how we do it. This is my script. You can sit with me. And I just started copying all the shit that he did. And I managed to get by because I didn't have a lot of real sales experience and I didn't like it. The thing that saved me looking back was I was at least calling on something that I loved, at least at the time. Like I've since lost some of the passion for politics, but when I got a hold of somebody, then we were talking about something that I was fired up about, which meant I went off script, but it didn't matter because I was so fired up and passionate about the thing that's how I sold was through that. And eventually I managed to work my way into management and then eventually like executive management there. Dude, I was so shy and introverted. I picked the cubicle furthest in the corner so nobody could hear me. And I would like lean down and like talk really low, like so people like it was, I didn't want
Like
to
a
be
late
doing
night
it, but
DJ?
yeah. And I made good money doing it. And eventually like I figured it out and it was something that I love. And eventually 15 years later, I really couldn't stand politics and I loved sales. So I started for the politics and I hated sales and then I left. Yeah, it's weird. It's wild. But sales is a life skill, man. Like it's like it's a life skill everywhere,
So I'm reading the almanac of Naval Ravikant. Did I say his name right? Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Learn to build things and learn to sell. And, I think about my own kids and I'm thinking, just go, like, if you can learn to sell and you can create something that you're good at, you're set, right? Even in the age of AI. Now, I don't know how well this statement will age, but that would be my belief because you still have to be able to sell. So I'm curious, how did you go from the chamber to SMU?
I had been at the chamber for 15 years. I'd worked my way up as managing director of basically all of small mid-sized business nationally. The conversation I had with the COO at the time, who was a mentor of mine, she said, hey, like your next move is here. Like that's like, there's no, you can't go further up in the organization. You're already in executive management. The next move is here. And here I am, I'm running the national sales from Dallas, but our office has ping pong tables and free Red Bull and we're in shorts and flip flops and we're crushing the numbers, but it's this very informal startup-y environment. And I wanted nothing to do with ties. I wanted nothing to do at this point with real politics.
Makes so much sense why you're in Mexico now.
Dress code, man. I was like, fuck that. I don't want to do that. And so I talked to the COO and I said, I don't think I want to do that. And she said, well, we don't think we want you to leave, but why don't we do this? Like, effectively get your MBA here. We'll help you out with some of this. You run the business, continue to run the business for a couple of years, and then we'll play it by ear. We'll see what happens. So, it was almost like a mutual arrangement. And at the end of that, SMU has a good like finance network. And I started networking with some private equity people and decided while I was getting my MBA, I wanted to do something in private equity. and that's the direction that I went to. And somehow that landed me in Mexico.
You asked about the English teacher thing, and this was really interesting. Somebody said, "Hey, what are you really good at?" And I said, "Look, I've probably got two things I'm good at. One is, and this guy's in private equity. He's responsible for sourcing deals for a pretty large fund. And he was talking to me about how they source deals. And he had some questions because it's ultimately a sales funnel. And he said, "What are you good at?" I said, I think I'm good at simplifying things so that people can actually execute on them. And you probably have seen a lot of companies where they over-engineer sales and thus nothing actually happens because it's too over-engineered. No one puts anything anywhere. No one documents because they're asking for too much information. I said, that's number one. I said, number two, I think I'm better than average at trying to get a sense of the story that's in the customer's head or the buyer's head and teaching you to talk in terms of that rather than in terms of your product or your offer. He said, "You got a humanities background?" I said, "Yeah, I was an English teacher." And he said, a lot of times the people who are very engineering, STEM, science, process oriented, this is the thing they struggle with. You can kind of help navigate us through some of that. And I think that's where the English teacher piece, for some reason, it's kind of benefited me over here is I think in terms of the story. And I honestly couldn't say, "Hey, here's the framework for the story," but it just sort of plays itself out. And there's a guy that friend of mine I want you to meet. His business partner was homeschooled. He was the youngest of 7 and he just read like 3 million books. And he said, "Adam, he's read so much that he just can see things because he's just read a lot." But he said, so he's real like in the world of business, he can help us tell stories better because he's just read everything. And so that's kind of the connection to sales, at least in the execution side of it.
I'm a big fan of yours in when I see you are hands down the best simplifier that I've ever met of really anything, but sales in particular. And because I've had you've been here in Cabo and you did a workshop. Some of the objections that you were talking about, some of the processes you were talking about, it was all based on simplicity. And to me, you have to understand something more to make it simple than you do to make it complex. Like it's harder to make shit simple than it sounds. So you have these one-liners and these ways of simplifying things that I was like, damn, that's good. That's good. I'm curious, like, is that a skill that you developed from teaching, or is that based on a different belief system that you have or something else?
I probably have this really big fear that I'm not going to understand something. And I will work really hard to understand it. When I'll work with a client, and you probably have seen this because I was a client of yours and you've worked with a ton of companies. And one of the things that happens is if you listen long enough, you start to realize, oh, you got the same problem as somebody else. You dress it up differently, but at the heart, it's really the same problem. It takes listening a really long time to go from what people say the issue is to what the real core issue is, the root cause. And I'm always thinking, am I missing something? Maybe there's something else. And there's probably something else I've missed somewhere. But we'd have to kind of keep drilling down. And there's just been, for me, this a fear that I don't understand it. So I just keep trying to understand. I'm like, oh, it all kind of comes into these handful of issues. The other thing that when I was in school, I kind of bag on liberal arts degrees sometimes because I felt like I got out and didn't know what to do with it. It bore for 20 years later. I would see these interconnections between like philosophy and research and sociology and literature and religion, but I didn't know what to do with it. And now in business, there's just something you'll see kind of connect because of some of the stuff you and I read or talk about. And I feel like, okay, if I can't make this so simple they get it, then I'm not doing my job. So I sort of feel I've got this compulsive needing to like help the person I'm working with get this idea so they can go and use it and they can get to the next level and solve the next problem. Or Mosey talks about get to that level, beat the boss. And I'm just trying to help people beat that boss, but it's got to be simple enough that they can do it. And it's like, oh, I get it.
I think you say things like that, but it's a good distraction, like because you're very sharp, and you can't simplify things unless you like truly know your shit. And speaking of the chamber, I was in one of my first big executive meetings. The COO was like, you can see the White House campus, and the VP brings me in, and this is like my guest appearance as a low-level manager. And I'm sitting in the room with people whose names are on the list of like the most 100 influential lobbyists. And so I'm standing there, I'm like, I'm young and I'm like, all right, this is exciting. And the environment lobbyist said something to the COO, and she said, do you think you're fucking smarter than me? Do you think saying a whole bunch of shit that I don't understand makes you smarter than me? Try again. And this is my first, and I'm like, wow, this is how we do things. But it was also a lesson. It stuck with me for two reasons. One, like, okay, like for obvious reasons. The second was, it's hard to simplify things. Like, it's actually easy to use a bunch of jargon. It's easy to repeat the shit you see in a book. It's hard to take what you see in the book and say, hey, let me break this down. And you used, when you were here in Cabo, I remember one of your one-liners, Jeff, you're doing the workshop with, and he said, well, I always get this thing, price pushback, like other people are cheaper. And you said, well, why do you think that is? No, just ask that question. When they say, hey, they're so much cheaper, you can just ask them, why do you think that is? And I was like, dude, the simplicity is beautiful, right? And do you think, is that teachable?
Yeah, I think that is. So are you familiar with Shane Parrish?
Yeah. Yep.
I was reading his point on first principles and questioning these things that we believe are true. And you think about it, it's like, okay, that's really important. Well, let's talk about salespeople. There's a young guy on our team, really love this guy, really excited about his future. I hope this ages well. And we're talking about somebody called in and wanted some pricing so they could present it to their CEO. And I said, because I think you've got to get people thinking so that they don't need you. Because if you can teach them to think, they won't need to come to you or me to get all their questions answered. And so I asked him, I said, and this is first principles thinking, as best I can do it. I said, what assumptions are you making? He struggled with that for a minute. And I said, all right, if she's going to present pricing to the CEO, what do you believe is true for that to be a legitimate comment? And it took him a while to get to the point where he's like, oh, I'm assuming she's seen this, she wants this, we're the only one, and we're at that point. I said, okay, great. Now what question do you need to ask when you're on the phone with her? It's like building a muscle. So it took a little while for him to realize, oh, I need to ask, are you sure you're ready for that? Or do you really, typically people are only asking for pricing when they've made a decision. Is that where we are? I think sometimes it's just simplifying it. Now, let me ask you this, because I want to turn this back on you. What is the problem you can solve that when you're talking to, it could have been me 4 years ago, it could be clients that come to you now. What's the thing that seems like this big Gordian knot to other people, but you kind of just get, and you just can you're like, oh, this is pretty simple. And I always am sometimes insecure about this. I'm like, I feel like you're going to get mad at me because what I'm going to present you is not rocket science. That's always my big insecurity.
What is the belief that they have that's limiting them in particular from getting to a certain point?
Yeah, because you kind of look at it and are like, oh, here's what it is. Like, it's so clear to you. You just take it for granted because maybe it's a superpower. It's this knowledge you've acquired through 25 years of just grinding.
It's applying what people already know to a space that they don't know, but it's the exact same underlying principle. So you take I work with a lot of IT companies. Well, dude, they know process. They know systems. They know shit, man. When I'm talking to IT companies, they have delivery dialed in a way that I go, wow, I wish I could productize a service that well. It's packaged, it's clean, the tech stack's clean. And I'm like, damn. But then we come to talk about sales and it's just big clusterfuck. And I go, guys, it's the exact same principle. A perfect example is, you want to hire a level 1 tech. Would you go hire somebody that doesn't speak English? No. Would you hire the cheapest person that you could find? No. Would you hire somebody that's maybe instead coachable and kind of loves tech at least and maybe has some baseline? Yeah. Okay. So when you go to hire your SDR, why are you trying to hire a $2 an hour person overseas that has no experience and know this? Dude, just apply the same principles, process, people, all the stuff that worked over here. We just apply it over here. And I think that's one of them. I imagine that's probably one of them.
It's funny because I see people, they know how to have this conversation with this buyer or this customer, but if I make a slight change in the customer, they don't realize the same underlying framework or principle applies. You just have to change some of the inputs. And helping them see that, it's kind of like, I almost am like, I guess this is why I'm in business, because we see these things and we help you make that shift. So I think that's some simplicity, because like you just see the simplicity. You're like, oh, the real thing is the process. Let's go apply the process.
I know this is, we feel the same on this, and we have this, like, you don't go hire salespeople to start. And I know you've worked with like a lot of law firms. You worked like with technical people. I work with the IT companies, and these folks a lot of times not only do they not feel like they can sell, they don't like sales, right? Like they want to avoid it at all costs. But you say, don't hire a salesperson, so you have to. For people that have a huge reluctance to sales in general, sell me on why that's true. Why is that true for you?
I will give you the reason that I think is probably, I think I've got two. So the first one is in the early days of the business, when customers and cash are absolutely critical. You can't, no one is going to care about it the way an owner or a founder cares about it. And even an owner or founder who says, I'm not good at sales, you sit across the table from them and you see something in their eyes. You're like, I trust you with my money. Okay. So early on, from a survival standpoint, I think it has to happen. Two, as you're trying to get in a new market or sell a new product, the owner or the founder listens and hears a different conversation than a professional salesperson. I'm not saying they hear a different thing than the best salespeople. The majority of salespeople hear something different than an owner or a founder does. So let's just say that, Ray, you're getting into a new line of work with IT or MSPs, and you're sitting down from a potential customer and they ask you something, and I'm just make this up. They're like, do you install AI recording devices or recording technology with SDRs? The traditional salesperson, they do one of two things. They either say no, or they run back to Ray and say, hey, Ray, if we need to do this to get this customer. So now we have a product problem, because we don't actually know that that's what they want. They've asked a question. So what the founder does better than anybody is the founder leans in and says, this is really interesting. Why are you asking about that? And they start to uncover, maybe there's this need or this demand in the market that no one looked at. Maybe they find out, hey, we can go deeper and wider with customers doing this. That's why, if you're pivoting, you're taking to the new to market, the founder has to stay really close. The final reason is everybody wants to hire some sales guy or sales VP or saleswoman to come in and just do it all for them. And the truth is, a lot of people it's rare to find the person who can build it and then do it. I can kind of tell you what to do and I can kind of guide it. I'm not going to be the one to do it on a day-to-day basis. They're really looking for free people in one, but no one can make the strategic call that an owner or a founder can on what direction are we going to go? How are we going to invest? And when you expect someone to come in and just figure all this out for you, it's a fool's errand. They can't, because you have to do that as the founder, and you have to know it enough to know when somebody's BSing you. So I think a lot of people get sold on, and I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with a CEO who says, well, I brought in this person to take care of sales and they didn't work out, or they couldn't figure this out. But somebody really sold them a story of like, I'll do this for you. I'm a great salesperson, for a CEO or a founder or an owner who didn't like sales. They were so glad to give it up to somebody they thought had magic fairy dust. But if that CEO was just a little closer to sales and did a little bit more, they'd realize, I think you're full of crap. And I do think there's a time to hand it off. I also think you hand it off at stages, and you hand off certain things to certain people so that they don't break it. Because if you break that revenue engine, man, that's expensive.
I know you've done some work with Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, and he has a book that I love, Who Not How. And so some of the pushback I get on that is, well, hey, I get it, Ray, but Dan says, just hire who. Like you don't need the how. So I should just hire people to do all this stuff. How do you reconcile that, the who not how, with that process?
I think you have to know enough to know how to identify the who. Because again, there's all these things we take for granted. So if you and I were talking and somebody said, let's just pretend they've got a brand new technology that they want to take and they want to sell to, just pick a customer, right? And they want to sell this brand new technology to this type of customer. And they say, I'm just going to hire a sales guy. You're like, well, have they ever sold a brand new technology? Had they sold at this price point? Had they sold at this customer? Had they sold in this sales cycle? And if they can't answer yes to at least some of those, you'd say, well, what makes that the right who? A lot of times we have these just rules of thumb that create massive opportunities for some people and get other people into trouble. And when it comes to the salesperson, there's the builder, there's the architect, there's the manager, there's the chief revenue officer, there's the strategist, there's the person who goes and wins you early accounts. It's very rare to have one person can do all those things or even multiple of those things. We're hiring an EA right now. I've kind of done some work and putting together a process on that and identifying what we need this person to do. I'm not the right person to hire the person to work for me because I've got my own blind spots and I know it. And so I need other who's to help identify and hire that who. And if for your clients, they're better off with the who, not how, having you hire those who's because you know what good looks like. They have no clue. They can't build your IT. You can't build their IT process. They could do that better. They're the who to do that. But the devil's in the details on that who, not how, especially when it comes to sales leadership. Marketing, right? How many people do you know have been ruined by a bad marketing firm and said, we can do that? They're actually really bad at it. But it was just like, it was a line of service they could offer because it subsidized the low margin stuff they're actually good at.
Yeah, that's a good point. The like having a baseline knowledge and to know who the who needs to be is kind of a prerequisite. And the best way to do that is to do the damn job. Like if you get in and do the job for a while, do the sales for a little while, you don't have to be the scalable salesperson, but you're going to have a hell of a lot better idea of who the person needs to be, what they need to do, what success looks like if you've done it for some period of time.
There's just times that a customer needs to hear from the CEO or the founder. So I'm curious, what have you seen about the different types of sales leaders MSPs need based on the stage they're in of growth? I bet you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, based on the stage of growth, I would say that depends on how you break down the different stages. So let's call it 0 to 1 million, 1 to 10 or 20, and then 20 plus.
Oh, you think 1 to 20 is like, you've kind of got that as one kind of category.
Yeah, I mean, you could break it into subcategories. I mean, you could see, like, I can see different points like 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 15. In fact, to be more accurate, I'd probably say 2 or 3 million to 20. Like, there's just some resources to invest and shit like that. But I think the leader that you need at 3 million is if you're hiring a real sales leader. Like typically, like if you're at 3 million and you want to build a sales org, what I would recommend is you kind of bootstrap it. Like you've got two approaches. I can go hire a sales leader and trust them to build out the sales org. Vast majority of $3 to $5 million companies, even $10 million companies, are not going to have the cash flow and the patience to hire a real sales leader and then give them the runway that's necessary to build a true sales org. Typically, what you're going to see is I'm going to hire kind of bootstrap. I'm going to systematize out the prospecting half of it. Then I'll systematize the discovery and closing part of it, up until that point, the owner is the sales manager, right? Or they're hiring us or somebody else like to be that manager. At a certain point, call it 10 million, call it 20 million, there needs to be, in this from my experience, there needs to be almost a CRO level kind of mindset to it, because you're starting to build an actual sales org, and the processes and the systems that are driving it are more important than like just give me the results in the short run. It probably mirrors the technical side of it to some extent. Like a lot of these founders on the IT side, they were the IT person originally, and then they hired out some of the lower level tech stuff. And then they hired in probably their first real tech, and they got to step out and be manager. And then, it goes on into sophistication as you grow. Well, shit, if you're running 20 million, do you know how to run a P&L? Do you know how to budget? Do you know how to hire a sales manager? Do you know how to manage a manager? So the skill set, I think, just changes over time.
But one of the things I've started telling clients is they're saying, hey, what do we need to do? And I said, hey, look, take our fees, what you pay us out of it. When you think about what you want to do, and I will tell CEOs to go sit with your CFO or your whomever they turn to, probably needs to be a CFO level person. I said, you want this level of growth. I said, I'm not going to tell you this. I could look at your books and we talk about it based on the economics, but you need to ask yourself, what are we willing to invest to get that growth? What made me think about that is, you're talking about we bring in a really good sales leader. Well, certain ones are going to have expectations on the level of investment around them. You might say, hey, I'm willing to spring for the sales leader. Well, are you willing to spring for the technology they're going to want? Are you willing to spring for some of the other resources they're going to want on marketing? And so I think that you've got to get owners and CEOs to start thinking bigger than just, hey, we want growth, to ask the question, how are you going to invest to get that? And I'm not telling you exactly where to invest yet, but what are you willing to invest to go buy that growth? That actually helps you line up with, I bring in a sales leader and I say, hey, look, you got $1 million budget to get where you want to go. Start showing me how you're going to allocate that. I'm not going to tell you wrong. I just need to know how you're going to think about it because you're going to want everything. This is your budget to work with to get there.
What do you think? So we're in the sales world. We know each other's kind of sales approaches. What do you think, if anything, you and I disagree on sales about?
Let me say this. This isn't going to be a disagreement. This is a stylistic thing. What I would like to adhere more toward to your end is more of getting even more rigorous on process. I don't think this would be a major disagreement. I think this would be a difference in the types of companies we work with. I'm working with companies at various stages. We work with a company who's got 400 million in revenue, or work with a company that's got 30 million in revenue, or a company of 5 million in revenue. And the thing that I have to think about differently, and it causes me a little bit of angst, is how do they get the outcome with the resources they have? And there's a lot written out there that says, all right, go hire the right people. Well, you're not always in a position to just clean house and start over. Sometimes you just got to make do with the people you got. And you can say, remember when predictable revenue, not repeatable revenue by Ray Green, but predictable revenue was written, and everybody thought, let's go hammer that process. And that's what we need to put in place because this guy wrote this book and he grew Salesforce. So we're going to do that. Is it going to work with your resources? Is it going to work with your market? And I don't think that's probably a big philosophical disagreement. I think it's more of, it's more dictated by the markets we serve. And I've worked with companies in very limited markets. Maybe they have 500 or 1,000 total customers. Well, you can't run a 7-touch system with SDRs because you'll call everybody in a year. And then what do you do next? And you have to think about it a little differently. I think it's probably more our market and just our natural wiring. But I would love your level of organization. I would probably know where to find things in my drive.
Me systemizing everything that I can, if that's the right word, is really it's the equivalent of me keeping no junk food in the house because I have no willpower. I'm actually not organized and I'm completely undisciplined on so many things that I have to systematize virtually everything in order to get the outcome that I want because I'm undisciplined. You know what I mean?
Here's what I really want to know. How do you get your wife and kids on board with no junk food in the house? I think that's the bigger thing that we need to answer on this podcast.
Well, we're not batting 1,000 on this. What I do is it makes its way into the house. Then I complain about it for the 2 weeks that it's here, and then that particular product is out of the rotation. Then another one may find its way into the rotation. I'm like, how in the hell did this get here? And I complain about it after I eat some of the junk food, and then it's out of the rotation. So I think over the course of years and years, what's happened is I've one by one kicked the most egregious products out.
What do you think in sales that you think about differently than other people you know? I think that's maybe the real question.
There's a big debate, especially in the IT world, about introverts and extroverts. And so many introverts who are IT business owners oftentimes believe that sales is just an extroverted activity. That it's just hey, if you want to hire a good salesperson, you've got to go hire somebody with ton of charisma. They'll kiss all the babies. They're extroverted. They can shake everybody's hand and do all that shit. I think both can be highly successful. So it's not like an either or. But I find introverts tend to be more successful, if at least as successful, if not more, because their intentionality in the relationship, not that it's cold, but it's much more intentional, right? So you send an extrovert to a big chamber event or a local networking event. They walk out, they've got 20 new friends. They feel like it was a home run, but deals don't go anywhere. An introvert's walking through that same event and saying, Adam, are you in my, and subtly, like, or, not out loud, and then saying no, because they're there with them on a mission. Like, they're not there. The event itself is not the reward. And a lot of super extroverted people who you think are going to kill it in sales end up just wasting a lot of time and building big Rolodexes of things that never move any deals forward. Whereas like introverts tend to be very intentional about who they're talking to, why they're talking to them, where they're going. And so I'd say that's one that I'd say is I get challenged on.
I like that. Well, and again, it's these rules of thumb, right? That if you can help them dismiss the rules of thumb, mine is, and it's in the same vein. People say, well, I want to hire somebody who went to these schools, and I'll clarify that in a minute, or they were in fraternity or sorority, or they played college sports. And and it's in the line of, I want to hire somebody from a big company. And I say, well, you're from a little company that no one's ever heard of. You're going to hire this person from this company. What do you think they expect you to have? And then I'll say, hey, I love athletes. I think it's great. I coach sports. I coach my kids' sports. What do you think is the correlation between being a college baseball player in sports and selling? And they say, well, it's competitive. I'm like, well, do you know if that person's competitive with others or themselves? And if they're competitive with others, do you have a competitive culture? Because a lot of people talk about competition, but they don't actually have a competitive culture set up, especially smaller businesses, right? And then it's, hey, what exactly, you need this person to prospect. What have they done ever in their life that makes you think they can go talk to strangers out of thin air? Those are things that I have to challenge, because people just have these rules of thumb that aren't based on anything. It's just kind of what people have said, and they've kind of fallen into it.
Well, you make a good point. The rules of thumb, they can be a great source of information and good advice, but they can also, like, hey, it's not paint by numbers. Like, the shit, you don't always paint blue here. Like, it's just not the case. There's context everywhere. So I'm doing the research for this interview, and I read that you saw the sonogram of your first child. And it was like a turning point. You went and, if I read correctly, you tore down a vision board. The only thing on the board at that point was the sonogram. True story?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying, when we write something, cause now I've got some people helping me put it all together, but like, these are my stories. I think there was one time that was sort of a composite, but that was mine. I was cold calling. We were in the sales training business. And, we got married in October and found out we were pregnant in January. I mean, it was not part of the plan. And we thought, we'll be married for a couple of years, do all these fun things. We find out we're pregnant. And I'm like, something flipped, like a switch flipped. And I'm on a call with a guy. He's running a company, and he tells me, my revenue dropped 70% in the last year. And we talked for a little bit. And I said, do you want to see if we can help? I didn't ask him for a check. I didn't ask him to sign a 3-year agreement. I said, do you want to see if we can help? And he said, I don't think so. And I knew it was sort of a gut check moment. That's like an MSP who is struggling to get past $2 million. The guy's been stuck there for 5 years. His marriage is on the rocks because he's stressed and he doesn't get home to see his kids, and he can't figure out how to get out of sales. And he's wanting to fund his kid's college fund. Talking to you with your background and your success level. Actually, that's a more exaggerated version. But then when you ask him if he wants your help, says, I don't think so. I remember where I was in my office. I had a little cubicle at the time, probably different than yours, like we've been over. But I'm standing there in this cubicle, and this guy, he'd been referred to me by someone we both know and trusted. And he says, I lost 70% of my business. And I said, do you want to see if we can help? He said, I don't think so. And I looked at that sonogram and I thought, okay, I know what this guy said is dumb. I'm not going to tell him it's dumb, but I have to be willing to ask him what he's thinking, because this is just, it's not just, yeah, I can help this guy, but I also, if I'm going to sell, I have to push through moments like these. These aren't major objections, but I have to push through this because there's somebody who is going to depend on me. And I'm looking at the sonogram and the kids, and I'm thinking, I got to fight for this kid. And I said, hold on.
Yeah.
And then this is literally what I said. You're telling me you lost 70% of your revenue. This is what I do for people. And you're telling me you don't even want to see if I can help. And I've told this story multiple times, and I always ask people, what do you think he said? And they said, no, said, no. He said, okay, let's get together. And it was sort of this watershed moment of, for me, you just have to fight through some things. And it's not even a fight. It's just, you don't pick the first thing they say at face value. And I had to have somebody depending on me for me to kind of make that leap. And my kids have kind of really been a big gift to me in terms of breakthroughs in my life, because I was in one relationship with family that wasn't super healthy, and they treated my kids bad. And I was like, all right, that's a line you can't cross. I wasn't willing to do it for myself. I was willing to put up with it because I'm like, all right, this is what a good person does. But when they mess with my kids, I was like, that's a line too far. So my kids have kind of been this reminder or this catalyst to make harder decisions or to grow a little bit.
I do definitely relate to having people depend on you being the motivation. And sometimes that can be a team, right? Like it can be your kids and on your personal side. I find the same thing on the business side. It's as a solopreneur, you'll make different decisions than you will if you've got 5 people on payroll, so sometimes we need people to kind of push us. I respect you as a dad, like as a family guy. I know Aaron and you guys have been out here. I'm curious because your brand is simple. Like as far as I like sales strategy, it's like the way you communicate, it's very, it's smart and simple. But if I look at Adam, like as a whole, you're an active dad, you're coaching football, you're father of 4, you're running a consultancy, you bought a company. I think you're also part of peer groups and, who knows, maybe more acquisitions. How do you reconcile simplicity with the complexity of life and practice? Like, how does that relate to you?
If I think about it, I had this problem for years where I compared myself to other guys, whether they're in a tech startup and they had these big exits, or they work for a private equity firm, or they do these sexy things. And I would say, I felt like, oh, I'm not doing enough. I had somebody probably like you ask me, what would you do differently? And I hadn't even thought about it. And I was like, well, I had to think, do I want that life? Because there are a lot of people who look at someone else's life and think, oh, that's great. They don't realize, well, they're never home. They're working 18 hours a day. I had a client. He's now a CRO of a massive company that recently went public. This guy's life, I love the guy. Zero interest in what he's doing. He's on calls from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And, his back's a mess because he's sitting or he's at his desk all the time and he can't get out. He's literally on calls with tons of pressure and working for insane people. And I realized I don't want that. And when it comes to simplicity, I started realizing, okay, I can build a really good business with people I really like. We can make great money and have a lot of fun. And that affords me the margin to go be more involved in my kids' lives. And look, I'm going to be honest. Right now, we're running the 2 companies. We're merging them. We're growing. We're adding a team. It's a bit nuts. I'm working on proposals at my kitchen counter at 9:00 at night until I can get some people to help me with it. That's where we are. But I need simplicity in some areas so that life can be more full in others. And when we talk to companies about sales, it's your sales cannot be so complex. I kind of think we only have so much brain space available. If your product's really complex, if the market's really complex, if you need to know these things, something's got to be simple so that people can do it mindlessly. And I try to keep our business simple because then I can communicate it and I can manage it and I can get other people into it. And eventually I can, go to the next part of the business. Yeah, I kind of want a simpler life because I want to spend more time with my kids. We're going on spring break next week. The thing I'm most excited about is I'll have 3 meals a day with my kids. I'm not on calls, not in meetings, not talking to clients, not solving problems, just hanging out. And so I need simplicity to create that margin.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency too, because on like deals at the dinner table, because that's the case right now for me too. Like with growing a business, there's a cost to getting what you want. And so, determining what it is that I want and what cost, what I'm willing to invest to do it. When you see, like on social media, I know you're active and stuff, when you see somebody talking about, hey, business ownership doesn't have to be hard. Like you can do it in 4 hours a week. You can do this, do this. Do you think, shit, I'm doing this wrong? Or do you think bullshit? Like that's not the reality.
There are people who've kind of gotten things dialed in. And look, I've had enough experiences meeting the people who did that I really looked at. And then you find out the other side of it is an absolute disaster. And you kind of start questioning almost everything you hear. I pretty much like to listen to people that I know and trust now. Like, I've seen your life. I've seen how you do it. I'm aware of some of the things. And I know that, like, what you talk about is not BS. You've lived it. You've done it. You've got the school of hard knocks. I think there are people who can get really good at it, but there's a lot of, like, you could do it 4 hours a week. And I think, how? I saw one of these reels on Facebook or something on LinkedIn, and this guy, he's talking, and he's one of these guys saying, I own 82 companies and I run 82 companies, and I can, if you have the right system, you can do it. And I'm thinking, you and I probably know a lot of really brilliant LPs at, private equity firms, sharp people. None of them are trying to run 82 companies. None of them. Because to do it well, I mean, the level of organization you'd have to have those companies be strong, enduring, profitable companies is just off the charts. And I hear things now, and I kind of think, all right, that's bullshit. There are other times I'm like, there's probably something I can learn there. So I want to stress test it and find out, well, how do you do it? What are you doing? And then I've seen enough to know that I've seen people bragging about their business and what they do, and they're building their personal brand. Meanwhile, they're engaged in fraud for their business. So I try to look at the whole person and say, hey, do I kind of like your life? Would I want to be like you and learn from you? Sometimes it doesn't have to be that way, but I'm kind of looking at the whole thing to see, all right, does this seem real? I'm a little skeptical, but yeah, business ownership's hard, man. And I think somebody was saying you're not an entrepreneur until you've missed payroll. We've not missed payroll, thank goodness. But I've laid in bed saying, what's going to happen next month? 2 a.m. And I don't think it happens as a solopreneur, but when you take on people and you're dealing with customers and you're managing working capital, it starts happening.
Being a parent and being an entrepreneur is one thing. Being a parent, being an entrepreneur, and then like if you are the sole income earner too, like it's a whole nother level of stress that I unless you've done it, it's very difficult to speak about it.
I remember having this conversation with him. He said, do you realize the average age of a founder? And at the time, I think he said it was 45. And maybe the number's 42. If you're at 45, you're a little more successful. And you think that's kind of crazy, because there's a part of me that would say, go try and start a company in your 20s. You have all the energy. You don't really have any risk. You just go do it. Because, you might be really smart, but kind of dumb. You might lack in wisdom and experience. But, if you blow it up, by the time you're 30, big deal, just start over. But once you're, you pick up, move everybody to Mexico. I had to figure it out. And there's some great stories that you shared. Families depending on you, trying to make it work. There's a different level of something there. And a big pile of cash makes it easier, but not always necessarily, right? Because you're still wondering, can I get it done?
Couple last questions here. Are you still coaching?
I am my 14-year-old talked to me into coaching his flag team. And, I made him organize it, but I am coaching, and I probably think about it more than I should.
When I look at coaching as a profession, one of the things that fascinates me is how coaches manage to get their philosophy and their system installed across a team, and how much similarity or not there is to a CEO that's potentially trying to take their vision and get it down to the team, and a coach trying to get it out to the team. Because you have all of these things in between. Like maybe you have another manager or another coach involved. You've got different talent. You've got actual execution. You've got opponents. How similar is that? Is that a fair comparison or no?
No. I do think it's fair. And I love this question because you've had a couple zingers here that have got me like, all right, I need to go think about this. Currently, I'll coach my 8-year-old in flag football. Got some great stories about that. He got flagged twice in our championship game last year. One was for unnecessary roughness. The other one was for spiking the ball after he scored. 2 flags, 1 game. My 14-year-old, I coach him. I used to coach high school football. In high school, or just in, let's just say, an organized sport, one of the differences is you have multiple practices a week where you have the ability to repeat the same mantras. And if you're the head coach, you're constantly repeating with your assistants, these are the things we're emphasizing. These are the things we're emphasizing. And a lot of times, even football, it's offense, defense, it's special teams. That's still pretty manageable. You don't need to be the one calling the plays and doing all the X's and O's, but you can emphasize these things, these things, these things. And I would love to see it more in companies. A couple challenges. I don't think it's impossible, but I think, all right, remote becomes hard because there's all this stuff. I'm not saying remote's wrong. I'm bad at it because there's all this stuff where you just don't rub up against each other in the break room at lunch. I can't just open your door and ask you a question. I got to get on a Zoom or I got to give you a call. So I think that's hard. And I don't know how to do it, but someone does. Two, I think for the CEO, one of the challenges is there's so many groups and constituencies that you're trying to manage and take care of. There's sales, there's marketing, there's ops, there's finance, there might be delivery or customer service, depending on how you break that out. There could be investors, there could be M&A, and you're trying to woo all these people. And I think if you're not really focused, disciplined, the message gets diluted. And one of the things that we really try to help our clients with, and you probably do the same, is, hey, look, don't do a flavor of the day. Like, pick it and commit. And you've got to emphasize things because you're trying to shape thinking, you're trying to shape behavior, and trying to create a culture. People ask me, hey, will you do a sales kickoff? And I'm like, I'll do it. I'm going to charge you a lot and I'll do it. I don't expect anything to change. But they bring somebody like me in, or you or Alex, and they're like, all right, get us fired up. And I'm like, that's not going to last. And you're going to, if you bring in Ray and then you bring in me and then you bring in Alex, what kind of thought or principle or framework do you expect to stick? It'd be better off. And then you guys got up and just repeated the same things all the time to start shaping the culture and creating the mindset. And that's what I would love to see more of, is applying that. Notre Dame is famous for having the sign in their, Lou Holtz put it up. He just dived to the day. In the tunnel, it said, play like a champion today, and the players slap it before they go out. And there's one of the things I've tried to work with certain companies on is like, you need to have a mantra that you guys live and rally around. And I used to tell people, like, if you're in a market where you might call on somebody for free before you get them, you need to have a sign in the office that says, I'm going to get you eventually. And you guys just need to slap it before you go out of the office. You guys be a mindset, but you have to have people really committed and clear on what they want, and they've just got to repeat it. It's absolutely doable if you can stay focused, if you know what you need to do for the various areas of the companies, at least sales and marketing. Just get clear and don't get distracted by shiny objects. So hopefully there's something in there for someone to kind of tease out and just say, hey, I need less in my life. I don't need more. Quick story, because you got me going. And there's a guy on my team, and he's asking me what sales books to read. And I'm like, stop. You don't need to read any more. I need you to go deeper on the two that I've given you. Like, let's master that, and then come talk to me about what else you want to read. You don't need to be a mile wide and inch deep. Just go a mile deep on a couple things. Let's get great at that, and then let's see if you need anything else. And Matt's the same thing with CEOs and running companies. It's just get really good at a few things, master those, drive those, and just in the sales work, and you're going to have a lot of success.
It's a good reminder for CEOs and leaders of any type that are prone to more ADD mentality, because which I am, like a mile a minute ideas. You have to develop some kind of filter or some type of system to create a barricade between all these ideas and all these things that may be happening and not letting them get to the team. Like, I used to make the mistake. I'd walk in the door. It was my first CEO job, and I'd walk in the door and I'd be like, all right, guys, just read a book. Execution. That's basically, it's your flavor of the day. It's like, that's the theme of the week, like execution. And then the next day you come in and it's like, read a strategy book, guys. Like, we got to get better at strategy. And so you would do this. And what I found was, it wasn't necessarily wrong. Like, I was feeding my own desire for a bunch of information. The challenge was I needed to develop the discipline to not feel the need to share that with everybody. When that comes back, either I have one person that I dump all my stuff to and they say, cool idea, right? We'll add it to the list, right? Like of everything else. Or you just create a system that says, I'm going to put this over here for right now. And if I still think that's important in a month, maybe we could chat about it. But I think there's a discipline built into that, for leaders to.
Well, I also think it's clarity. And one of the things I've seen working with you, and I bet you're really good with your clients on this, is you're really clear on what matters. And whether it's your values or your pillars, you just kind of come back to those and you can determine, does this help this or does it not? And you're an entrepreneur, you're an enterpriser, you're always going to see opportunity. But the thing that you're also good at is, here's what I'm working on. Here's why I'm doing it. It's kind of why you started certain businesses. Initially, it didn't seem clear. And some of these people just are not, they're kind of like, we want more sales. Okay, well, let's just go read a bunch of books. Well, are you executing? Do you have an operating system that you can fall back on, that you can fit all this in? Do you have a way to train people? Do you have a way to coach and develop them? Do you know what you're coaching and developing too? Because otherwise, you're just going to be all over the place. By the way, I'm having to learn the same discipline with my team. Is like, I can't just throw up a bunch of ideas, and it's like, it's going to stress them out, especially really execution-oriented people. They're like, settle down. So maybe I can sort of support group where we just share all our ideas. And
well, I believe there's a selection bias in the type of people, like what we do for a living. It's probably not uncommon. Our minds were racing a mile a minute. We're creative. We have these ideas. We're not complete idiots. Like, some of them are really good ideas, but putting those into some triage process where, is this ready? In fact, I watched a video of Bezos, and what Jeff said was his COO or one of his operators, the person who was in charge of building out the manufacturing, the distribution, and a lot of the stuff on that side of Amazon, early days, told Jeff, said, you have enough ideas to kill this business. If you don't stop putting those ideas out to the floor, you're developing a backlog, right? So think about it in terms of manufacturing. You're just dumping all this like work in progress that's happening, which means none of it's getting done efficiently, none of it's getting done effectively, and you're confusing all the people who are supposed to be doing this shit. You're going to kill the company. So you need to figure out a way to release your ideas at the rate that the company can absorb them. And that stuck with me. Like, watching that video, I was like, damn, because I learned that lesson the hard way. I did the same thing, and it's still, to this day, I have to pull back sometimes. Like, I'm doing it again. Fuck, sorry, guys. I'll slow down.
No, that's really good. My words for this year are focus and finish. And, I'm meeting with our team Friday to kind of plan next quarter. And I've learned I need to think about what can we do, and I'm limiting what we're trying to do so that we can actually get it done. And I'm actually even not going to talk about sales and marketing. It's just operations and delivery. That's all we're going to talk about, is what needs to happen around operations and delivery, because I'm going to go work on sales, and we're going to continue to grow, but we've got to be great there. And we're going to limit the scope to be great, and that'll allow us to grow later.
In our business, through the MSP business, we have about 30 SDRs who are in South Africa right now. And so we're actually potentially planning a training in Cape Town this summer. And I think Cabo may be a good mastermind type event come winter. So potentially, I'm not committing to it. I'm not saying yes, but yeah, no, okay. Potentially.
I like it. You seem committed. Thank you. I'm glad you committed to that. Appreciate it.
No, speaking of like my ideas of my, like, dude, I'd love to do it. But I've got to be better about committing. You know what I mean? Last question here. Your entire careers, I can read it, I can see it from the outside looking in, from high school English teacher to football coach to sales trainer to company acquirer. It seems to follow this path that I see of teaching people how to get better. Like, that seems to be something you're just good at. And my question would be, who was most influential in teaching you to get better?
There are a handful. The most influential people in my life, every single one of them was in a role of teacher or coach. Every single person who's been incredible, they literally were a teacher or a coach. And I had one really good teacher in high school. I had a great coach. I named my son after this coach. This great story there that we'll talk about over margaritas sometime. But we actually went to Italy with this guy, and he put together this phenomenal trip for me and my son and him. And then I had a couple of really, really, really great teachers in college. One was an English teacher. One was a philosophy teacher and one was a sociology teacher. And then I had a really good pastor, again, a teacher. I had a couple mentors who were truly trying to teach in my early 20s. And then in business school, I had these world-class teachers. It's incredible to me that I never put this together, but the most influential people who've put their fingerprints on my life were all teachers and coaches. And there were bad ones. There were some very mediocre ones, but there were a handful of people who were just world-class. And they changed the way I think and approach life and helped me kind of see some things and put some skills together. So
I would say a few people stand out. One is as a kid. So my childhood was kind of like, it was very volatile. There's a lot of changes. And I had one person named Troy Lewis. He's written a book now, and he worked for my mom. He was in the Air Force, worked for my mom, and for no reason, no obligation, he knew I loved basketball, and he just became like a second dad to me. He would take off. It was so cool. He would take off. He saved all of his time off in the military for March Madness for basketball. And he had walls of videotapes, and we would come over and just watch the shit out of North Carolina, watch the shit out of, Michael Jordan and everything. That was where my love of basketball came in. But he stepped in, I think, as a mentor, as a man, just a good person. And we're still in touch and text every time Carolina plays Duke. And I would say the second one, I had a few people, the chamber experience was really, really influential for me because there were several people that believed in me more than I believed in myself at the chamber. And so like the VP of sales that promoted me into management well before I should have been promoted. Like I wasn't the top salesperson. I didn't have a degree. But he said, no, you're the guy, and put me into a role that I wasn't even sure I was ready for. The COO at the chamber at the time looked at me one time and said, "Hey, this next promotion, you need a bachelor's degree. We'll buy it, but you're going to have to go full time and do the job. Are you willing to do it?" And I said, "Fuck it, yeah, let's do it." She was kind of responsible for ascending me through that whole organization, and every time believed in me more than me. Like, "Hey, you know what, Ray, you can do this next level thing." And I was like, "Well, shit, that's a big title. That's a big thing." And yeah, so looking back, I'd say a couple of people.
that's pretty cool. That's all.
Hey,
Thanks
so
for
when you're
sharing.
done, what do you want to be known for?
It's funny. You talk to these people and they think about legacy, and they're like, I want to build this great company, and I want to do great work, but I don't need to write the great American novel. The thing that I really probably want to be known for is, there's part of me that wants to write the great American novel and like sit on the beach, but I'm not there yet. Man, I really want to be known. It's kind of divided, but it's very similar. There's a song by a guy named Josh Garrels called At the Table, and it's basically a father singing to a prodigal son who's come home and says, "Hey, you'll always have a place at my table." And the thing that's probably most valuable to me, the most important thing I do, is that time my family has around the table. And I've got like a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10, 12-year-old, a 14-year-old. They're kind of yelling and all talking to each other, and it's great. And my dream is in 30 years, right? Well, I'll be, 75, that they're all at that table together with their spouses and their kids, right? That's really any legacy, is just them staying together and loving each other. And hopefully the thing that I'm known for is, I was faithful to what I was called to, in terms of my faith, my family, and I loved people really well. So, I'm not like the warmest guy, but hopefully, if you talk about me in 30 years, you're like, man, he's been a great friend to me. So, all the other stuff, I think we do good work and we focus on that, but that's not what I want to be known for.
Thanks for sharing, brother. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate your time. Look forward to doing it again.
Love it. Can't wait to do it in Mexico.